On the second episode of the Future Club podcast, we are welcoming again a very special guest, Mashal Waqar. Mashal is the co-founder and COO of the Tempest, a global next-generation women's media startup founded in 2016 by Laila Alawa in Washington, D.C. The Tempest is one of the fastest growing media companies, with a monthly audience in the millions. The impact that Mashal, Laila, and the Tempest are having is internationally recognized. Mashal is Forbes 30 Under 30, a 2-time TEDx speaker, a startup mentor, and a highly regarded entrepreneur. But this is not only about the achievements and the prizes. Mashal truly is a wonderful human being with an inspiring journey made of hard work, determination, transformative experiences, a search for belonging, learning to unlearn, and most importantly, acting upon beliefs and values to make the world a better place.
Brought to you by Scopernia, this is the Future Club, the podcast that uncovers how leaders future-proof their businesses. Here's your host, Jeremy.
Mashal, welcome to the podcast and thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you for having me.
I have a first quick question so our audience can directly know you better. Can you give us a brief introduction about yourself? So who is Mashal Waqar?
That feels like such a big question. I don't like introducing myself or just speaking about myself in general. I guess it just feels uncomfortable. But hi, everyone. I'm Mashal. I am a media entrepreneur. So I run a startup called The Tempest. And we've got one mission to amplify the voices of women through storytelling and media. So who am I? I am a techie. I am an entrepreneur. I am a startup mentor. And I enjoy a lot of things. I enjoy learning, unlearning, creating processes. I mean, this sounds boring, but I mean, I just enjoy a bunch of different things. And I'm a third culture kid.
Cool. And then there is a lot of stuff into that we're going to deep dive into. But let's start from the beginning. So the first part of this podcast is really about your journey and what you have been through, your story, and what has made you the woman that you are today. So let's start from the beginning. You are from Pakistani origin, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm a Pakistani.
And you grew up in Saudi Arabia, right?
Yep, I was born and raised there. Yeah.
So how was it to grow up in Saudi? How was your childhood like, and how do you think that it shaped you a bit into what you're doing today?
I mean, Saudi is just different, I think. And so my dad's side has been in Saudi for the last 3 generations. So Saudi is home to me and, my family. People who live there understand, and people who step out after understand it's a whole different world. And in a way it is, you can find yourself in a bubble because you are disconnected and in so many ways, right? At least this was my experience, like in terms of like growing up. I think the internet was really the first time that I realized the world was much bigger than what I knew it to be. I mean, there's always this feeling of not feeling like I belonged. And that was primarily because I think as third culture kids, and this is an experience with most Gulf kids, I think, where our parents and our families and, our nationalities are different than the countries that we were born in and that we grew up in. And so we kind of adapt these different cultures. And even, the schools that we go to, they're so diverse, like everyone is from different. It's quite diverse by nature. And so you're kind of like this amalgamation of these different cultures. And that's how you grow up. And that's how you see the world. From that lens. And I think that played a huge role in obviously like how I saw the world, right? And in how I grew up. I went to a pretty basic school. It wasn't really fancy. We didn't have a lot of resources. And I think anytime we had anything at all, it felt like it was just really exciting. I mean, I'm thankful for the education I got, but like that, it wasn't until much later I realized like, wow, like these were things. And I didn't even know what fancy schooling was like, right? Because I was a scholarship kid and have been for most of my life. So even then, that school to me, it was, I think I was grateful to even be able to go there. And I think it felt like an opportunity that I really wanted to not waste. And so, the goal was always to work as hard as I could and to get the best grades ever. And I think if you have brown parents, like, you'll know, like, brown parents are exceptionally hard on you. It's always like, there's like this unrealistic standard. You always have to do the best. And especially if you're the eldest kid, there's extra responsibility and pressure. So that was always there. My parents always pushed me to get the best grades, but I think I was just tough on myself because I enjoyed studying and I really wanted to learn as much as I could. And I felt like the education that I was getting was a privilege. I remember like 2007, 2008, when really like I started using the internet, and this is like the time of like MSN and Yahoo and all these different things. And then a couple of years later, Tumblr, I think Tumblr was like my biggest eye opener. So I used to have a Tumblr blog. It opened up my eyes to everything that women could be. And it felt like there was a whole other world outside of my current reality. And it felt like things were possible for women. And I don't know how to explain it. On one hand, I really don't like when people think women are oppressed or whatever from the region. I hate when I hear statements like that and these different stereotypes. But the truth is, at least from the community that I was from, and going to get an education outside of where your family is was not a norm. Spending on girls' education as well is not a norm. It still isn't. And a lot of people that I grew up with had very different experiences from their brothers and their siblings in terms of what they were able to do and where they were able to venture out to, right? So there's still a lot of norms. We still have a lot of work to do, basically. But anyway, so Tumblr really opened up my eyes to everything. And I think this was like the starting of it. This is before Tumblr became what it is now, where it was all these different fandoms and all these different people speaking out. And I think feminism was something that I didn't even know about at that time. And I slowly started learning about all these different things. And I think that's when I really just wanted to go out of Saudi. And going to the US was like a really big dream of mine, where I thought, okay, if I go there and I get an education, then I might be able to make something out of myself. And I remember at that time thinking, all I really want to be and do is to be financially independent and to be able to just, just to work.
That was your goal.
Yeah, that was my goal. I just wanted to work. I wanted to work and I wanted to be able to earn and then just be independent. That was literally the goal.
And so your dream was to go to the US, and you did that. You studied in Texas, right?
Mm-hmm. I did, yeah.
And I remember when we were discussing, I could understand that the experience was not really like you imagined that it would be.
Yeah, it was. So, I mean, I had to spend like almost 2 years convincing my parents to even allow that. I think at first, so they actually straight out refused at first. And I thought, okay, well, I'm not going to go there. So mentally I was prepping to go to Pakistan. We have family in Pakistan, but I think at that time, especially the city that I'm from, like things, there was a lot of unrest and they didn't think that I would be, like they had a lot of safety concerns basically. I think if you live in Saudi, you are very sheltered. A lot of things I think you don't experience until you step out when you have to do things on your own. And so there are a lot of concerns and they just felt like, they just changed their mind in the last minute. I remember I was supposed to give these entry tests and my dad called me up and he's like, you're not going to study there and you're going to go to, you can go to Texas. And in Texas, because I did have family there. So they felt comfortable sending me there. And they felt like, okay, this is going to be a safer option. And it was one of those moments in my life where I was just like, what? This is the most unexpected thing ever. And yeah, so I ended up going there. I was there for almost a year, 2 semesters basically. And the thing is, like, in my head, the US was Tumblr and what I had also watched in movies, right? And shows. So my expectation was very different. I thought this was going to be like, I think what I had in mind was New York City, and I thought all of the U.S. was like that in retrospect, I think. And so I had a huge culture shock, right? I go there, and I remember my first night in, I was staying with my family, and I asked my aunt, I think it was like 10 p.m., and I was like, do you guys want to go out for dinner? And they're just like, at this time, do you want to go? Everything's closed. And I'm like, what? And also, so the halal restaurants were closed, and they're like, we can go to the 24/7 place if you want. And I was just like, what do you mean things are closed? So that was like my first obviously experience of like, okay, so this is a different place and, you know, things are different. But that whole experience, I think, really changed me in terms of, I think for the first time, I realized what it felt like to be visibly different. I don't know how to explain it, but there were a lot of different experiences and racist experiences, and I think Islamophobic experiences that really changed my perception of how people perceive the rest of the world, right? To a lot of people, if I was born and raised in Saudi, I should have been Saudi, right? So that whole concept of why aren't you from where you are was different to explain. And then the other part was also, me being a Muslim brown woman was like, there were a lot of questions people often had. Curiosity is fine. You know, there's nothing wrong in answering questions, of course. But I think, I remember this was for one of my government classes. We would get extra credit. So one of our assignments was we had to go to a town hall meeting. In that meeting, there were people screaming out like, when are you going to ban these Muslims? And, you know, when are we going to get rid of them? And they're taking over. And I was sitting there and I was thinking, this cannot be real. Like, did I really just hear that? And it was my first experience of like, wow, like this is very different than what I thought things were going to be like. So that whole, and no one said anything. People were very riled up and there was this whole rhetoric where it was like, Muslims this and that, and it was just one thing after the other. And this is me at like, what, I think I was 18. I had just turned 18. My freshman year in college, I'm sitting there thinking, I cannot believe I'm here. I don't even know what to do. I don't even know what I can do. I'm an international student. I think until I lived in Texas, I didn't realize this whole freedom of speech and this whole like independence, like Lone Star State, like this whole like spirit that you get, I think, when you live there. So after the meeting, I walked up to these two women, and it was me and my friend, and they had been super vocal, right? So I was like, you know, not all Muslims are terrorists, and I couldn't even believe I had to say that. And she starts screaming at me. She's like, go back to Syria. You're oppressed and you're in this country because your country didn't give you any rights. And like, she just kind of went on and on and on. And I was like, I'm not Syrian, but it didn't matter if I was Syrian or not. Like, she was like, I've lived in Syria and I've had the worst experiences and this and that. And like, you're here, so you're not forced to wear a headscarf. You know, you're lucky to be here. And it was like, just going on and on. It was these two women and they would not stop. And I ended up crying because I didn't even know how to respond to that.
Aggressive.
It was very aggressive. Like that was one of the worst experiences, I think. But just in general, I wasn't happy. It wasn't the first one. There were a lot of other instances. There was this horrible perception about Muslims, and I think that was just really difficult at that time. And for me, I think that whole experience really changed how and where I wanted to be. So I thought at that time, I don't think I want to be here. At that time, to be honest, I think I want to be closer to home, and I missed my family a lot. And I thought, I don't want to deal with all of this. In retrospect now, I think maybe I should have just transferred schools to a different state and, just kind of switch things up. But I think at that time, I just didn't feel like an option. I just wanted to go back to what was familiar. And so I decided to apply to an American university with a campus in Dubai. And I felt like Dubai would be a good place. My mom had always suggested it before, but I just, I don't think I had considered it as seriously. But then I started looking at options and I realized there was a school and I could transfer my credits and it would be smooth and I could start over. And so I applied to...
And that was...
RIT
Rochester
Dubai.
Institute, RIT.
So
Rochester Institute of Technology.
In Dubai, So I applied there and switched my majors from computer science to computing security, got an incredible scholarship. And so that happened and my dad's company gave me a scholarship. And I think that really was a big reason why I was able to go to university and college, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. And you arrived here in Dubai in a place that... it's not the opposite of Texas, but we're very far away from the values from the values that could be there. Let's put it that way. In a place that is full of diversity, a lot of different nationalities, people living with each other. I mean, it must have changed also your perspective and open opportunities, right?
I think this was probably one of the best decisions of my life. And I think maybe I had to kind of experience that to appreciate this for what it was. But I loved it. I loved Dubai. I think my college had more than 100 nationalities, I think. So there were people from like literally everywhere. If I thought Saudi and my experiences there were different, like this was a whole different experience. It was like a melting pot of like people and cultures, and everyone was so friendly. And the most important aspect is that it was safe. I think that was the biggest factor for me and for my parents as well at that time, because I felt like, I think just living on your own can be a difficult experience. And I think safety is one of the things that I prioritize a lot. And I haven't lived in a lot of places where I felt safe just going out on my own at night or at any point. And I think this is one of those few cities in the world where if you're a woman, you can live alone, you can feel safe, and you know, you don't have to worry about your personal safety as much as you do in other places. And I think that to me was the biggest, like, most important point. And so, yeah, this was, I mean, and I think Dubai really, it changes you. If you live here for a while, like, it will change you as a person. And I think how you just view everything and how you experience the world. And I think, honestly, I mean, I'm not biased. Maybe I am a little bit.
Probably. You're probably a bit biased.
But I do feel like this is one of the best places in the world.
And so, but at that time when you started studying, you still had in mind this goal of being financially independent. And that was linked to, of course, having good grades, performing well, and then landing a good job in a major company, right? That was still your goal at that time when you studied at the RIT.
Yeah, that was my biggest goal. And so I started working back in my freshman year. I wanted to get as involved as I could, but I also realized a lot of these different kids who were in university came from really amazing schools who had like a wealth of resources, right? In terms of like MUN clubs and all these different student clubs and activities and experiences. And so I hadn't experienced that in school. And so the first thing that I did when I joined RIT Dubai was I tried to get as involved as I could in student activities and obviously like student engagement. I think there's a few really important things that I learned. One was advocacy and standing up for myself. And as I joined student government, I mean, my first year I was a freshman representative. So we have elections for that. And I was elected. I was basically representing my whole freshman year. And then at the end of my sophomore year, I ran for student government president. That whole experience really changed how, just a lot of things that I felt like I knew about the world.
And can you tell me about it, because you've been vocal about that experience before. I think it says a lot about the way that you managed it, and what how it shaped you as a person and how it shaped your beliefs. I think it's a tremendous experience that you've been through. So can you explain us how was the election process and how you got to that presidency?
Yeah, it was really difficult because so I was the only girl running. And I didn't think it would be a problem because before me, we had already had a student government president who was a woman, right? So, and she was one of the best ones. I had worked with her and under her, like basically presidency in the last 2 years. And so I was the most qualified candidate because I had the most experience. I had a lot of different conversations with staff and with a lot of different like departments to understand what was possible and what wasn't. And I really did my homework. The sad part is my gender was constantly brought up in like during those elections, and it got messy. It got messy because I remember during the presidential debate, this one statement that was said, and it was something like, how can you be a good president? You don't even give guys your number, and this will be a problem for someone who's running for that position. I was astounded, and I just couldn't understand why my gender was even a factor, why it was even being brought into question. I really had to explain and really stand up for myself in terms of everything that I had done and why I was the most qualified person and why I was the right person to bring all these changes. This was not the first time, but I think it was my first time realizing that my gender was going to be brought into conversations. It was just a very difficult experience at that time. And I remember feeling like really disheartened and disappointed and frustrated. So I ended up winning those elections. And because there was this pressure of having to prove myself, and I really wanted to make sure that people would never question my presidency or if I was good enough to get that role, right? And I think because of that, I became a workaholic in a way, basically, where student government became my life, and it was 24/7. I literally would be thinking, dreaming, and working on different things. And you know, we had this ambitious plan. Thank God, like we ended up, you know, really doing almost everything that we had really said that we would. And it was one of the most successful years. A big part of that was because I felt like there was a different standard that I was being held to. And that really changed a lot of things for me at that time.
And then a bit afterwards, that's when you discovered the Tempest, and you actually started to write for the Tempest in 2016, I think, at the end of August. And then you said to me the first time we talked, something that really stuck with me is that you said, I got the Tempest, and then the Tempest got me. So how did you discover it, and how did you feel the click between you, your values, and what they were actually doing?
I discovered the Tempest this summer of 2016. I remember I was in Saudi that summer, and I was on Facebook, and I read an article about third culture kids. I clicked on it, and then it was and it kind of went on like this binge reading spree where I like read article after article. I think I spent like 3 to 4 hours reading articles on this platform I had just discovered, and I was in love with the content. And it felt like for the first time in my life, there was a platform that I felt like I belonged to, because there were all these amazing women, and they were writing their stories and sharing their experiences. And it felt like I could have written those pieces, but it was by all these different people in different parts of the world. And I could resonate with what they were writing and how they were feeling. It was one of those moments where I was like, I want to write for them or join them in some way or the other, because this is an amazing company. So at that time, I was working with 2 different startups. And I had told you my goals, right? Where it was really I feel like it's like a chicken and egg chase, right? To get a job, you need experience. To get experience, you need a job. You know, the Tempest, it was a whole different thing. So there were a couple of things that I wrote to them about. And I said to them, you know, I've been covering different conferences, and I have a tech background. So when I go to these conferences, I feel very singled out, because anytime I ask questions, they don't take me seriously. And I had already had a couple of different experiences, sexist experiences in tech at that point when I was applying for places and in different things. And so I realized like these were not isolated incidents, and I wanted to write about them, because I felt like, you know, I didn't see that perspective on the platform just yet. And so I wanted to write about that. I wanted to write about my experiences as a third culture kid, and I wanted to write about accessibility. So my alma mater has one of the largest deaf communities and you know, students. And that's when I got involved with accessibility. I realized there's a whole different like area that I actually have no idea about, like, you know, and started understanding the stigmas and the challenges that people of determination really go through. So they're called people of determination here, or the disabled community, all around the world, right? And so I also wanted to write about the importance of accessibility in different spaces, and why it was so important. And so that's how I started off as a staff writer at the Tempest. And then a couple months in, I was doing this editorial fellowship where, you know, you get mentorship and you get training, and you get to write a bunch of different articles, and it's very intense as a program. And so at that time, I started working with the founder and CEO, Leila, at that time. So she's the one who started the Tempest and has had this amazing vision, right? I started working with her, and out of my just love for the startup, I started building these different tools and initiatives for the startup, because I really wanted them to succeed. Of course, I didn't have any long-term plan of myself or seeing myself at the company, because again, I was going down that security route, right? So security tech job, like, going into corporate, like stable career.
Stable salary, safe.
Yeah, safe, exactly. And you know, that was what I had lined up. But then with the Tempest, I mean, a couple months after, so I went from there to her asking me to become an editor and starting the tech vertical. And I thought, all right, I can always do this, you know, just because this is one thing that I felt like this is an important perspective. I want to hear from more women in tech, and I want to read these experiences. And so went from there to a couple months later, Leila asking me to join as a co-founder. And that was one of the, I still can't believe that happened sometimes. but yeah, going back to, you know, you saying, like, I do feel like at that time, even though I had experience in all of that, I didn't know what it meant to be an entrepreneur, and I never saw myself as one. And let alone to become a co-founder, I didn't even know what that meant. In my head, I thought, okay, it's just going to be another full-time job where I'm a CTO and I'm a co-founder, but I don't know the weight of that title. So the first year, I think I was a lot more involved in the tech aspect, and I spent a lot of time, I think, just kind of learning as much as I could and, getting involved with startups and whatnot. But then the year after, everything changed. I started, understanding myself, and I started understanding what being a co-founder meant. And I think this was also when we started learning about the challenges. And I think personally, so I brought the Tempest to the UAE in 2017. And it really started a whole different journey after. Running a startup and growing and scaling and all of these different things, a whole different experience, right? It's really difficult. And I think just the personal challenges that come with it, where I think that part I had no idea about. And I became a lot more involved in the operations side and a lot more of the biz dev side and a lot more of the functioning parts, the business side of things, not just the media and the content side of things. And I think that was a whole different switch.
And we're going to talk a bit more about the Tempest in the second part of the podcast and how it became the success that it is today. But coming back on your journey, and it's a bit of a fast forward, but it's very personal to you. You were selected as Forbes 30 under 30. Was it always something that you had in mind, or that you even imagined could happen someday?
I mean, I thought it was one of those lists that I did idolize in a way, where it was like, okay, like I'd love to be on that list, but I also thought, okay, I've got like a good few years before I can do something where I can get picked for that list, right? So I felt like, okay, I've got time. And so my co-founder was listed on, I think this was 2017. And then at that time, they had asked me to they'd asked for my info as well. And I thought both of us would. Now, because I wasn't an original co-founder when the company got incorporated, that didn't end up happening. So I also had really low expectations of something of that sort ever happening again. Yeah, so I got listed last year in the media space, right, on the list. And it was very out of the blue in a way. Like, I don't know, like, because they don't send you a confirmation or anything that you're listed. You just see it when the list is released.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask. How does it work? Do they call you? Do they tell you, hey, you're selected, baby? Or
They don't. They did contact me and ask for some info that I had sent. But I wasn't sure it was going to happen, and it did. And honestly, I like teared up. Like, I started crying when I found out. I called up my co-founder, and both of us, I was like, hey, go to ForbesMiddleEast.com. And she's like, wait, did something happen? Is there a new article? And I was like, no, just go onto it. And my photo was there on the collage that they had. And both of us like teared up. And it at that time felt like, you work together for years on something, and then I guess being recognized does feel great, but at the same time, it kind of feels like validation sometimes. Because, when you're a young founder, there's a lot of challenges, but being taken seriously is a big one. And you really have to prove that you know what you're talking about. And so in some way, that was a big moment for that. Now I feel like my mindset has changed in a lot of different ways, right? So I think recognition is nice, but at the same time, if you don't get it, it doesn't mean that the work you're doing is not important enough. I think that's one thing that I've realized. And then also, like, the press and the PR side of things can get tricky and messy. And I think that's something to be wary of, because it can be very distracting, and it can distract from the work that you're doing sometimes if that's why you're doing it for. And it's there's a narrow line, there's a thin line between falling into that, right? Because you don't realize it. No one consciously, I think, thinks I'm doing this so I can get covered or press. Or at least I'd like to, I don't know, but I don't think this is why people do things, right? But subconsciously, I think, it's that wanting to be appreciated and validated.
I think what other, it changed something else probably for you is that, you were studying in tech. You describe yourself as an introvert person. And there you have it. You're the co-founder and CEO of a very successful startup. You have a place in the public life, and you're recognized for what you do. Do you have any advice for people that are listening? And how do you manage that? How do you keep your energy and focus? How do you make sure that you keep your focus on what is important, and you can manage yourself in that new situation?
So I am an introvert, and I realized that after after graduating, because school was a safe space for me. But out of school, I think I realized I was a big introvert, and I think it was really difficult for me to step out of that. I don't like the limelight. I don't like being in the public eye in a way, And then especially my first year, I was very uncomfortable. Like, I had private social media accounts, so going from that to public accounts and understanding the media space and really getting into that it was a process, and it took time. And I also realized a big part of being a co-founder is in some way I became the face of the company in this region. And I started speaking out about different challenges that entrepreneurs were facing and women entrepreneurs were facing. So, I remember I would go to events and I would listen to different experiences people had, and I would feel like I've never had those experiences. And why aren't we talking about 1, 2, 3, right? And so I felt like because of that, if I am on there on stage, I'm going to talk about these experiences, and I'm going to talk about maybe what a vast majority of us go through. And I think that really led me to becoming more comfortable with speaking. I mean, I still get really, really like nervous and anxious before I go on stage. Like it makes me really nervous, but it's something that I have become comfortable with over time. I guess part of it is also like exposure, right? Like, so the more times you do it, not going to say it becomes easier, but you become a little bit more comfortable maybe. And I think taking ownership of my words and really understanding the power in them. And then when it comes to, obviously how I keep my energy, I guess like the other part of it is also like, if you're an entrepreneur, it's difficult and it's going to be challenging. And I think the biggest lesson is you have to be your biggest advocate. And not just if you're an entrepreneur, but I think in most things in life, one thing I've learned is, you have to stand up for yourself and you have to speak up. And I think that was one thing that it's scary, but it's one thing that like is important. In terms of the energy, I mean, it's not, I don't want to sugarcoat anything. It has been difficult. I mean, it's going to be close to 4 years that I've been doing this, and it's been some of the most challenging years of my life. There are a lot of moments that have also got to me and that remind me of why I keep doing what I'm doing. And a big reason for that is because I still think the media landscape and the world and how we see people represented, there's still a lot of work to be done. And I still think we have a long way to go before we make more progress, right? And so we've broken out a lot of stories about a lot of important issues. Mental health is a really big one. Normalizing conversations around it, where people feel comfortable enough to talk about it. I think that's a big one. We had a piece a couple of years ago about postpartum depression, and this mother wrote this piece, and it was one of the most touching pieces I've read. And I remember it went viral in this region because people do not speak up about this stuff. These are not open conversations. There's still a lot of taboos in terms of what we feel comfortable talking about. And anytime I get emails from people who read our content and who tell us how much they believe in the work that we're doing and how the Tempest is changing their life, I think that reminds me of why I continue to do what I'm doing. Because there have been so many moments where I've thought like, I don't know if I can take it anymore. And I think remembering the fact that it's not about me or my co-founder or my team. It's about every single person who reads an article and feels impacted in some way or finds some sort of strength to even believe in themselves and believe that, their voice matters and in that there is a platform where they will be heard. I think that to me is the most amazing thing in the world. And it's the reason why I joined all those years ago, where I felt like I finally had a platform I could connect with. And over all these years, that's what we've been doing, right? That is what gives me the energy and reminds me. And I think the other thing I have to remember is I'm also still very early on in the journey, right? There's so much more I have to learn. Even if things are really difficult, they might be extremely difficult at that moment, but hopefully over time, like there's something I can learn from them. Don't think way too far ahead and don't think too short term. Just like sometimes I'm just trying to get through the day, and I think that has to be enough.
As a closing statement to this first part, I have one question that I will ask to all of our guests on the podcast. Tell me about something that you were always convinced was true until you realized that it is not.
That's an interesting question. So the way that I don't view the world as rigid, okay? I think things are fluid and people are fluid. And I think I'm constantly unlearning things, things that I knew to be absolutely true that I'm unlearning. And I take that as a norm now, where whatever I know could very well be wrong. Maybe not now, but maybe in the future, right? So that's just how I see the world. And so every few months, it's a different thing. I think a big conversation, and I think this is also relevant to what's been going on around the world, is learning that you can be a person of color and you could still be part of the problem when it comes to racism, and understanding that you could be the one who has suffered from the system, but you could still be part of the systemic problem of bias. And I think understanding how deep the problem goes, and understanding until we speak up and until we do something about it, we are part of the problem and we're complicit. I think that's been the biggest thing that I've learned, because I think my assumption was also that if you've gone through challenges and you've faced all of this stuff, then you will not, you'll understand, you'll empathize, and you'll get it, and you will want a different path, right? But I don't think that's true a lot of the times. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I thought was to be true, and it's not.
This was part 1 of our discussion with Mashal Waqar. We hope you were inspired by our journey. In a couple of days, we will release part 2 of the podcast, where we will discuss more about the Tempest, how they massively grew their audience to millions, and what they are trying to achieve as a fast-growing media company. Don't hesitate to follow us on Spotify, to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast streaming platform to be notified when we make a new upload. This is the Future Club podcast brought to you by Scopernia. Thank you so much for listening.